You just landed after a 14-hour flight. You're exhausted. You're thinking about your hotel bed. And then a Customs and Border Protection officer asks you one simple question. And in those 3 seconds, you just gave a federal agent complete access to your WhatsApp messages, your photos, your emails, your banking apps, and every private conversation you've had for the past year. This is not a hypothetical situation. This is happening right now at airports across the United States and in countries around the world. Here's a number that should terrify you. In 2024, CBP conducted over 47,000 electronic device searches at U.S. borders. That's 129 phones, laptops, and tablets searched every single day. And that number has increased by over 300% in the last 8 years. The terrifying part is that most travelers have absolutely no idea they're making this mistake until it's far too late. Today, I'm going to reveal exactly what this 3-second mistake is, why border agents are legally allowed to do things that would be completely unconstitutional anywhere else in the country, and most importantly, how you can protect yourself without breaking any laws or causing problems with immigration. This information could save your privacy, your career, and potentially your ability to enter the country you're trying to visit. Let's get into it. Before I explain the mistake, let me tell you about Sid Bikanavar. Sid is an American citizen, born and raised in the United States. He works for NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratory as an engineer. He holds global entry status, which means he's been pre-approved as a trusted traveler by the U.S. government itself. In January 2017, Sid was returning from a trip to Chile where he'd been racing solar-powered cars. A hobby, nothing suspicious, nothing unusual. At the Houston airport, CBP officers pulled him into secondary inspection. They asked for his phone. Sid explained that it was a NASA-issued device containing sensitive work information. He explained that he wasn't even sure he was allowed to hand it over. The officers insisted. They told him he had no choice. They pressured him repeatedly. Eventually, exhausted and feeling like he had no options, Sid gave them his passcode. They took his phone into another room. He doesn't know exactly what they accessed, what they copied, or what they did with a NASA engineer's device containing potentially sensitive information about America's space program. Sid Bikanavar, American citizen, NASA engineer, global entry trusted traveler. If this can happen to him, what do you think happens to everyone else? This story was reported by The Verge, covered by major news outlets, and Sid himself spoke publicly about it. This is not rumor. This is documented fact. And here's what makes it even more disturbing. What happened to Sid happens to thousands of people who never make the news. People who don't have the platform or resources to speak out. People who simply hand over their phones, watch their privacy disappear, and move on with their lives, never knowing what was accessed or stored. So what is this 3-second mistake that so many travelers are making? It comes down to one word: consent. Here's the scenario that plays out thousands of times every single day at international airports. A CBP officer pulls you aside for secondary inspection. This might be random. This might be because something flagged in their system. Either way, you're now standing in a small room with an officer who has significant authority over whether you enter the country. The officer looks at you and says something like this: "Can I take a look at your phone?" And here's where most people make the fatal error. They say yes. They hand over their phone. They enter their passcode when asked. They watch as the officer scrolls through their messages, their photos, their apps, their entire digital life. 3 seconds. That's all it takes to say yes and hand over your device. And once you've given consent, everything changes legally. You've just waived rights you didn't even know you had. You've opened the door to a level of search that would require a warrant anywhere else in America. But here's what makes this even more complicated. The rules at the border are completely different from the rules everywhere else. And understanding these rules is absolutely critical for anyone who travels internationally. Let me explain something that surprises most people when they first hear it. The Fourth Amendment of the United States Constitution protects Americans from unreasonable searches and seizures. In normal circumstances, Law enforcement needs a warrant based on probable cause to search your phone. The Supreme Court ruled on this in Riley versus California back in 2014. But here's the catch. The border is not normal circumstances. There's a legal doctrine called the border search exception, and it fundamentally changes everything. Under this exception, CBP officers have the authority to search travelers and their belongings at ports of entry without a warrant and without probable cause. This isn't new. This doctrine goes back over 200 years. The reasoning is that the government has a fundamental right to protect its borders, control who enters the country, and prevent the smuggling of contraband. What is new is the application of this doctrine to electronic devices. Your phone contains more personal information than your home does. It has your communications, your location history, your photos, your financial information, your medical records, your political views, your religious practices, and your most intimate relationships. And at the border, CBP takes the position that they can search all of it. Now, CBP policy does distinguish between two types of electronic device searches, and understanding this distinction is important. The first type is called a basic search. In a basic search, an officer manually looks through your device. They scroll through your photos, they open your apps, they read your messages. They can do this without any suspicion whatsoever. They don't need to justify it. They don't need a reason. The second type is called an advanced search. This is where things get more invasive. In an advanced search, they connect your device to equipment that can download and analyze your data. They can search deleted files. They can run forensic software. They can copy your entire device. For an advanced search, CBP policy requires reasonable suspicion. But here's the problem. Reasonable suspicion is a much lower standard than probable cause, and the definition of what constitutes reasonable suspicion is largely left to the discretion of the officer. What might create reasonable suspicion? Previous travel to certain countries, inconsistencies in your story, nervousness during questioning, a tip from another agency. The possibilities are broad and subjective. Now let's get back to that 3-second mistake. When an officer asks if they can look at your phone, they're asking for consent. If you say yes, you've just made everything easier for them from a legal perspective. With consent, they don't need to justify the search. They don't need to document their reasoning. They don't need to worry about any legal challenges later. You gave them permission. But here's what most people don't realize. The question itself is often designed to sound like a command. Officers are trained in compliance techniques. The way they phrase things, the tone they use, the environment you're in, all of it creates psychological pressure to comply. You're tired from traveling. You're in an unfamiliar environment. You're facing someone in uniform with authority. You just want to get through and continue your journey. Saying yes feels like the path of least resistance, and that's exactly what they're counting on. Let me tell you about another case. This one involves a Canadian journalist named Ed Wu. Ed is a documentary filmmaker and photojournalist who has worked for major organizations, including NBC News. He's covered stories in some of the most dangerous places on Earth. Over a period of several years, Ed was stopped and searched at the U.S. border multiple times. Officers demanded access to his devices. They questioned him about his work, his sources, his contacts. For a journalist, this isn't just a privacy issue, it's a threat to press freedom. Sources who speak to journalists confidentially could be exposed. Investigations could be compromised. The chilling effect on journalism is real. Ed challenged these searches and eventually filed a lawsuit with the help of the Knight First Amendment Institute. His case highlighted how border searches can threaten constitutionally protected activities like journalism. But here's the reality. Most people don't have the resources to fight back like Ed did. Most people just comply, hand over their devices, and hope for the best. So what happens if you don't give consent? What if you politely decline? This is where things get complicated, and I need to be very clear about the different scenarios. If you are a U.S. citizen, you have the right to refuse consent. You cannot be denied entry to your own country. However, refusing consent can lead to extended detention. Your device can be seized for further examination. You will likely face additional questioning. The process can take hours. But here's the important part. If you don't consent, any search that does happen has to be justified under CBP policy and potentially faces more legal scrutiny later. If you are a lawful permanent resident, you generally have similar rights to citizens in terms of eventual entry, but extended detention and device seizure are still possibilities. If you are a foreign visitor, this is where the stakes are highest. Refusing consent could be grounds for denying entry entirely. Officers have enormous discretion in deciding who enters the country. They can determine that your refusal indicates you're hiding something. They can simply decide you're inadmissible. This is the difficult reality. Foreign visitors are in the most vulnerable position when it comes to device searches. Before anyone thinks this is purely an American issue, let me be clear. Border device searches are becoming standard practice around the world. In Canada, border officers have similar authority to search electronic devices. The Canadian Border Services Agency has conducted thousands of device searches in recent years. In the United Kingdom, Schedule 7 of the Terrorism Act gives border officers extensive powers to stop and question travelers, including examining electronic devices. In Australia, the Customs Act allows officers to require passwords and access to devices. Refusing can result in prosecution and fines of up to $5,000. In New Zealand, failure to provide passwords when requested can result in a fine up to 5,000 New Zealand dollars and seizure of the device. Even in countries with strong privacy protections, like Germany and other EU nations, border officials have certain search authorities that exceed normal domestic law enforcement powers. The trend is clear. As more of our lives move on to digital devices, governments around the world are expanding their ability to search those devices at borders. The landscape around border device searches has been shifting significantly, and there are several recent developments you should be aware of. Court challenges in the United States have created some new precedents. In 2019, a federal court ruled that suspicionless searches of phones at the border violate the Fourth Amendment. This ruling applied in certain jurisdictions and created some limitations. However, CBP has continued to push back, and the legal situation remains fluid. Different courts have reached different conclusions, and we may eventually see this issue reach the Supreme Court. In terms of policy, CBP has updated its guidelines several times in recent years. There's now a clearer distinction between basic and advanced searches. There are supposed to be additional oversight requirements for advanced searches, but enforcement of these internal policies is difficult to verify. Here's another statistic that puts this in perspective. According to data obtained through Freedom of Information requests, less than 0.01% of travelers are subjected to device searches. That sounds small until you realize that with hundreds of millions of border crossings per year, we're still talking about tens of thousands of individuals having their most private information exposed. There's also been increased attention to the issue of cloud data. When you hand over your phone, you're not just giving access to data stored on the device. You're potentially giving access to emails, cloud storage, social media accounts, and any app that's logged in. CBP policy technically says officers should only search data stored on the device itself and should disable network connectivity. But in practice, the line between local and cloud data is increasingly blurred, and oversight of individual searches is limited. So how can you protect your privacy while still complying with the law and getting through the border without problems? Let me share some practical strategies that lawyers and security experts recommend. First, consider traveling with minimal data. Before international travel, back up your phone to a secure location and then remove sensitive apps and data. You can restore everything once you've cleared customs. This is sometimes called traveling with a clean device. Some frequent international travelers maintain a separate travel phone that contains only the essentials needed for their trip. No personal messages, no sensitive work documents, no apps with private information. Second, log out of accounts before crossing the border. If you're not logged into WhatsApp, there are no WhatsApp messages to read. If you're not logged into your email, there are no emails to scroll through. Logging out doesn't delete the data, but it means it's not immediately accessible on the device. Third, use strong encryption and understand your device's security features. Both iPhones and Android devices have encryption capabilities. A powered-off iPhone with a strong passcode is significantly more difficult to access than one that's just locked. Fourth, understand the difference between biometric and passcode unlocking. In the United States, there's legal uncertainty about whether officers can compel you to use your fingerprint or face to unlock a device. Some courts have treated biometrics differently than passcodes. Consider disabling biometric unlock before reaching customs. Fifth, know your rights and be polite but firm. You can ask if a search is being requested or ordered. You can decline to consent while making clear you're not obstructing or resisting. You can ask for a supervisor. You can ask for documentation of any search. Sixth, consider consulting with an immigration attorney before travel if you have particular concerns. Different situations require different approaches, and professional advice tailored to your specific circumstances can be invaluable. Let me address WhatsApp specifically since it was mentioned in the title. WhatsApp is end-to-end encrypted, which means the messages are secure in transit. But here's what many people don't understand. End-to-end encryption doesn't help you if someone has physical access to your unlocked device. All those messages are sitting right there in the app, completely readable. The encryption protects against interception during transmission. It doesn't protect against someone scrolling through your phone. This is true for Signal, Telegram, and other encrypted messaging apps as well. The encryption is meaningless if the endpoint device is in someone else's hands. WhatsApp also has features like chat backups that may store your messages in cloud services in ways that aren't encrypted with the same level of protection. Understanding how these features work is important for your overall security posture. If you have sensitive conversations in WhatsApp, consider using the disappearing messages feature. Consider regularly clearing chat histories. Consider whether those conversations need to be on a device you're carrying across international borders. Different types of travelers face different risks and need different strategies. Business travelers often carry sensitive corporate information, trade secrets, client data, negotiation strategies. If you're traveling for business, your employer should have policies about international travel with company data. Many corporations now issue clean devices specifically for international travel. Journalists and activists face heightened scrutiny in some situations. Protecting sources and sensitive information is critical. Organizations like the Committee to Protect Journalists and the Electronic Frontier Foundation have specific guidance for these travelers. People with medical information on their devices face privacy concerns of a different kind. Health data is deeply personal, and having border officers scroll through health apps raises significant concerns. Lawyers carrying privileged client information have professional obligations that may conflict with device search demands. There have been specific legal battles around attorney-client privilege at the border. LGBTQ travelers going to or through countries with hostile laws face potential safety issues if their phones reveal their identity or relationships. Anyone with immigration concerns, whether past issues or pending applications, needs to be particularly careful because any information found could be used in immigration proceedings. I want to address something that doesn't get talked about enough. The psychological pressure at the border is real. You're in a position of vulnerability. You're tired. You just want to get to your destination. An authority figure is making requests that feel like demands. It takes mental preparation to calmly assert your rights in that environment. It takes knowledge of what those rights actually are. It takes acceptance of the fact that asserting those rights may lead to delays and additional scrutiny. Many people who later regret giving consent say they felt they had no choice in the moment. They felt that refusing would make things worse. They felt intimidated. This is why preparation matters. Knowing what you'll do before you face the situation makes it much easier to stick to your decision when you're standing there exhausted after a long flight. Where is this all heading? The tension between digital privacy and border security is not going away. If anything, it's intensifying. Our devices contain more data than ever. Governments face genuine security challenges. Privacy advocates push back against overreach. We may see clearer legal standards emerge from court decisions. We may see legislative action establishing clearer rules. We may see technological solutions that allow for some form of search while protecting the most sensitive information. But for now, the current reality is what we have to deal with. And that reality includes significant government power to search devices at the border and significant uncertainty about the exact limits of that power. Let me bring this all together. That 3-second mistake of casually saying yes when asked about your phone is something you should never make without understanding what you're agreeing to. This doesn't mean you should be confrontational or refuse to cooperate with legitimate border procedures. It means you should be informed. Know that you have the right to ask questions. Know that consent, once given, is difficult to undo. Know that the border is a unique legal environment where normal rules don't fully apply. Prepare before you travel. Minimize the sensitive data you carry. Understand the specific risks for your situation. Have a plan for how you'll respond if asked about your devices. Remember Sid Bikanovar, a NASA engineer, an American citizen, a trusted traveler. If he can be pressured into handing over his phone, anyone can. Remember that 47,000 number. That's not a hypothetical. That's 47,000 real people who had their devices searched last year alone. This is the world we live in now. Our entire lives are on our phones, and governments around the world are very interested in what's on those phones when we cross their borders. Being informed is your first line of defense. Making deliberate decisions instead of reactive ones is your second. Here's what I want you to remember when you walk through that airport. Your phone is not just a device. It's a key to your entire life. Your conversations with your spouse, your private photos, your medical records, your political beliefs, your financial information, everything. And the moment you hand it over without understanding what you're agreeing to, you're not just giving them a phone, you're giving them you. Don't let a 3-second mistake undo years of private conversations. Know your rights, prepare accordingly, travel smart. Because in that moment when a uniformed officer looks you in the eye and asks for your phone, the only thing standing between your privacy and total exposure is what you know and the choice you make in those 3 seconds. Make sure you're ready. That's all for this video. If you found this information valuable, make sure to subscribe and share this with anyone you know who travels internationally. This is information that could genuinely protect people, and most travelers have never heard it. Stay informed, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one.